Welcome to Washington in Focus Daily. It is Thursday, July 30th, 2026. I'm Carlene Johnson, the Center Square, Washington's state government reporter. And in today's episode, it has been a long day already. Last evening, Wednesday evening, concluded with news that Seattle Police Chief Shon Barnes had either been asked to resign or was about to be fired by Seattle Mayor Katie Wilson. So I expected when I got up this morning that everything would be official, but no, it's been all anonymous city officials transpiring everything that went down, telling various media outlets, unnamed sources, saying, here's how it went down. Apparently, the chief might have been asked to resign or not. Here's what's happening with the mayor. Anyway, we're going to get into all of that. It has been a crazy day. And word on the street again from my colleague, Randy Diamond, our Seattle reporter, is that some Seattle City Council members are none too happy not to have been consulted before whatever decision has been made or is being made. So we've got all of that for you. And then my colleagues TJ Martinell and Tim Clauser have more insight into the long delayed initial press conference Sunday night after the shooting at the Bite of Seattle. And that's what sort of precipitated all of this fallout within the city. Were they, in fact, waiting on Governor Bob Ferguson to arrive? Well, the governor says no, that's not what was going on. TJ Martinell received some documents from the mayor's office. We'll get into that. And then a Washington state supervisor at the Department of Children, Youth, and Families, DCYF, is speaking out publicly about the devastating effects of the Keeping Families Together Act, which has created a very high bar for removing children from homes of parents who may be drug addicted, abusive, neglectful. It has led to a shocking number and ever increasing number of child deaths or near fatal incidents. And she's sharing some things that are difficult to hear, but very important, she thinks, to speak out at this point about this. So you'll have that exclusive interview in today's episode of Washington in Focus Daily. Okay, so as we record this podcast early Thursday afternoon, we are still waiting for anything official from the mayor's office about the Seattle police chief, Shon Barnes. Is he in? Is he out? Was he asked to resign and declined and now will be forced out? Anonymous sources inside City Hall started all of this when they released some information to a couple of media outlets saying that, in fact, he was about to be forced out. But again, nothing official from the mayor's office. And we've been working feverishly since very early this morning to confirm this independently and have not been able to. The Seattle Police Officers Guild president has sent me a couple of statements today. He too says it is bizarre how all of this is playing out. Now, again, to remind you, because you've been out of town, some people on vacation just tuning in, what went down Sunday night is what led to all this. So it was at the Bite of Seattle at Seattle Center. We had a mass shooting. We had a 15-year-old and a 19-year-old who opened fire on one another. The 15-year-old uninjured, he's in custody. The 19-year-old was shot and killed. And then we had several other people, bystanders, caught up in the crossfire, if you will. Total of 3 people killed, including the 19-year-old suspect, and at least 4 others hurt. One other person apparently had some minor injuries, and she was treated at the scene and did not need transport to the hospital. But it was a crazy scene. And then what happened after that? So that happened about 6 o'clock Sunday evening. It wasn't until nearly 11 o'clock Sunday night that the official press conference happened. And there was not, I should say, a great deal number of members of the media who were very displeased. They were all there, ready. And of course, I know some of these people from having worked with them over the years. I'm sure they were really hoping to have everything in the can by the 11 o'clock newscast on Sunday night. But it was not to be because, again, it was about 11 when this happened. And then it came out the next day that Chief Barnes was out of town. He was in Dallas attending a conference at the time. But then it started to come out that he's apparently been out of town a lot. His wife and kids still live in Chicago, where his residences. He rents an apartment when he's in Seattle during the week and is apparently out of town a lot on weekends. So there was tons of pressure on him and on the mayor and other city officials to say, what gives? This guy's making $360,000 a year and he's not here a lot, especially in the summer. Weekends, that's when everything kind of goes down, right? As evidenced by what happened this past weekend. So outside City Hall this morning, after it started to come out that Chief Barnes was either being pushed out, gonna leave on his own, whatever. There were members of the Black community, some prominent members of the Black community, the NAACP, the Urban League of Metropolitan Seattle, with a group called 100 Black Parents that all showed up outside City Hall because they were mad. They like the fact that we have a Black police chief in Seattle, and they apparently support his direction for policing and public safety in the city, and they were not pleased to be finding out that because of what's happened since the shooting, that he's being asked to make an exit. So I, as I mentioned, was calling and texting with Seattle Police Officers Guild President Kent Liu this morning trying to get confirmation of this. But he said they were still in the dark. He was seeing the same rumors, same, anonymous sources quoted by media outlets. But as of 11:15 this morning, President Liu with SPOG sent me this text. He says, nothing official. This is ridiculous, but this is coming from the same mayor's office that couldn't hold a timely press conference on Sunday. The mayor's office is just going to attract more heat over this. So, my colleague who covers the city of Seattle for the Center Square, Washington, Randy Diamond, spent the entire morning, and he's still there now, in Seattle at City Hall trying to get things figured out. It looked initially like there was going to be a press conference this morning in the lobby. They were setting up for that. And then nothing ever happened. And then some members of city council started coming out. And Randy was able to get an interview with one of the Seattle City Council members who was not pleased that they were not consulted about how this would all go down.
We heard rumors yesterday and we do not have confirmation. The public doesn't have confirmation. We need to know in either direction whether it's her intent to keep the chief or not. I will say that I am very supportive of the police department. They did a great job, and I've heard from constituents that feel like they did a great job on Sunday responding on the scene quickly, as did fire. Today, I am very concerned that we have not heard from Mayor Wilson whether she's going to fire our police chief, particularly at this point in time. And I will also say that it's my understanding that our crime numbers have decreased since the chief has been here. And so I don't know the reason or the rationale for why she would fire him if she is going to fire him. But either way, we need to know. It is unacceptable for this amount of time to occur without confirmation from her office as to whether or not we indeed are going to have Chief Barnes as our police chief, or what the plan is if he's not going to be.
So again, nothing official from the city at the time we're recording this podcast for this Thursday afternoon. I would think by this evening something will be official. It's very bizarre how this is all played out, and frankly kind of an embarrassment on the mayor's office from the people that have been texting and emailing me today saying they really can't believe how this is playing out. And now, as questions continue about that long delayed initial press conference after the shooting Sunday night, my colleague TJ Martinell got some public records back from the office of Governor Bob Ferguson. He got those records back lickety split, which is interesting because often when you submit those public records requests, the public records officer responds, receipt of your inquiry. It's going to be X number of days or weeks, months. Sometimes these take more than a year to get records back. But in this case, he got them back right away. Maybe because Governor Ferguson wanted to make clear that it wasn't his fault. It wasn't him being late to a planned press conference as to why it didn't happen until, nearly 5 hours after the shooting. So we're going to get into that now with my colleagues, TJ Martinell and Tim Klauser.
Welcome to another episode of Washington in Focus. I'm your host, Tim Klauser, with the Center Square's Washington State investigative reporter, TJ Martin. Coming on the heels of a what's been called a mass shooting in the city of Seattle last weekend, in the aftermath, there was apparently a 5-hour delay in Mayor Katie Wilson addressing the press with the Seattle Police Department Chief Shon Barnes. We learned this morning that apparently Shon Barnes has been relieved of his duties as chief of Seattle Police. TJ, tell me, was the nearly 5-hour delay in communications after the shooting the reason that Shones was fired?
I think that there's a lot going on, and I think that what we're witnessing is the culmination of different issues and problems, systemic problems going on with structural command, leadership, and communication, and an understanding of who's responsible for what, and the ability to make decisions during a crisis. And so, I I think that we're still watching the dust settle. But somebody that I think that there's a lot of finger pointing and people in elected office trying to avoid blame for something either they did or they didn't do or weren't responsible for. So that's really we're kind of for anybody who's watched the Maltese Falcon, we're at the end of the movie where they're all figuring out who the fall guy's going to be.
Yeah, it's interesting to see how this is all playing out in the aftermath of this shooting and how particularly all the attention is around this press conference and the apparent delay in doing so. I mean, notably, we've seen a lot of conflicts in the Wilson administration since she's taken office. A few different people relieved of their duties, one being the parks director after taking a lot of trips out of state, some of those costs landing on local taxpayers. We recently learned that Shon Barnes, the SPD chief, his primary residence is in Chicago, and he's frequently in and out of the state. He had plans to leave Washington for about a month and didn't plan to come back until sometime in August. It looks like now that he's being relieved altogether. TJ, I mean, a lot of attention is being placed on Barnes, Wilson, and then Governor Ferguson in the timing of this press conference. I mean, you got some public records back, I
Yeah.
believe, from the governor's office showing some text messages between him and Katie Wilson. I mean,
Yeah.
with three of these people kind of headlining this issue right now, who ultimately bears responsibility here?
I mean, I, I'll just say this about the text messages is that's Governor Ferguson sending a very clear message. It's not his monkey, it's not his circus. I think that that's just what's going on. He's saying this is not what I'm responsible for. I mean, at the end of the day, it's Kate Wilson. She's the mayor of Seattle. This was a shooting that took place at a food festival in the city that she runs and manages, and the police department is underneath the mayor's office, so which is why she's has the authority to let Barnes go. And I think that as far as the delay is concerned, the text message that she sent to Governor Ferguson said there was likely to be a public conference. That I feel like since my story came out yesterday, I feel like there's a lot of people missing the significance of that, where there's controversy over this thing because of the delay of 5 hours. This could she's suggesting that the delay could have been even longer. So people could have gone to bed had no idea what was going on. And so the question is, what was the reason for the delay? And we don't know. But the reason why I think Governor Ferguson's office got these records back to me so quickly is because people were insinuating that the press conference had been delayed so that he could be there for a photo op. And I didn't watch the entire press conference. It didn't seem like Governor Ferguson said a whole lot. I think he just was asked to be there. He showed up and he's sitting around. He got there, I think, around 9, according to his communications director, and was sitting around there for an hour and a half and not even knowing if there was going to be a press conference. And so finally, there was one at like almost 11 p.m. And so the question that remains is, what was the delay? And something that's important to do a distinction. There's the media availability, but what also was delayed was the police briefing where they were not providing information to the public about what had happened, what was being done, what can the public do to report, what is any description of the suspect. No information was coming out. And so the public was left in the dark for a critical number of hours where somebody could have seen the suspect who's still at large and reported them to the police and they could have been caught. Or the suspect could have gone off and killed someone else and they wouldn't have known it was the same suspect. So this is all that's coming out. And I think that we still don't know what the reason for the delay is. There's so many reasons for the delay. Was it because, the police chief wasn't in the uh, city at the time? He was out, yeah, I think in Dallas. Was it because Kate Wilson didn't want to provide information, and when she actually tried doing it, it was inaccurate information? So what caused her to get inaccurate information? And did she delay it in order to wait for Chief Barnes to be there so she didn't have to deal with this whole thing on her own? Or did they come across information about the suspects that they didn't know they wanted released to the public for reasons that we could still be looking at?
Yeah, and at the time of the shooting, the police chief was at a conference in Texas, and then reporters were told as they were waiting hours for this press conference to take place that SPD was waiting on dignitaries to get there, seemingly referring to Barnes there. And I believe that the mayor's office has refuted those statements since. But I mean, this comes on the heels of broader communications issues within the Wilson administration. I mean, they're currently looking to replace the communications director. I believe the person that was previously in that position recently left the administration. The mayor frequently encounters issues with the local media, especially TV stations, in doing on-air interviews or them catching her in certain situations and then her just ending the interview on the spot. So, I mean, are we likely to see anything fixed from Barnes being relieved of duties, or is that more so just deferring blame from the broader communication issues facing the mayor?
I mean, I think it really is going to have to come down to voters making de- making decisions about who they want in public office, because this is just a fact. Kate Wilson had no prior experience governing even a small little town like Roslyn in central Washington. She has no prior experience managing or leading anything of this city of this size. She wasn't even paying her own bills. Her father was financially supporting her. So I think the question is why. I would want to hear from for somebody who voted for her supporter saying, why did you think she was going to be able to handle this well? Because we're dealing, I mean, there's the dynamics are really fascinating. You've got her with no background experience in leadership whatsoever. You've got Barnes, who has a history of being at different police departments and having controversial stuff going on at all these different places. Then you've got Governor Ferguson, who's been in politics for decades, and he was on the King County Council. He was our state attorney general. Now he's our governor. And so it's interesting to see the different responses. Barnes freaks out in front of a reporter, and it one of the most heated confrontations I've ever seen between a public official and a reporter. You've got Kate Wilson, who's basically, like you're saying, gone radio silent on stuff. And Governor Ferguson is basically the only one that's communicated with me. And based on, I got the most detailed timeline of the events, of an event from a communications director. I've never seen anything like it. They gave very precise times for where he was and what he was doing. So I think they're just sending the message that this is not our problem, you know? And so I see a lot of people wishing it was, but that doesn't seem to be the case. I'm not getting a public record from the governor's office 2 days after I asked for it because they did something wrong. So
Yeah. And interesting that you got the records back so quick when in other
right.
cases it takes the governor's office months to deliver records. But I mean, you're right. This is Katie Wilson's first time being in an elected position. Nonetheless, mayor of Seattle will be the most populous city in the state of Washington and a hub across the Pacific Northwest. She still has 3 years left in her term. It'll be interesting to see what happens over those next 3 years, whether she goes the full term or makes a different decision before then. But TJ, appreciate you covering this and getting the records that you did. For anyone hoping to read TJ's story, you can catch it at thecentersquare.com. Otherwise, thank you for joining us for another episode of Washington in Focus.
All right, next item in today's episode of Washington in Focus Daily. A Washington state supervisor at the Department of Children, Youth, and Families, DCYF, whose name is Jeanette Obelts. She is speaking out in her capacity as president of WFSC, the Washington Federation of State Employees, and their local 889, about the devastating consequences of the Keeping Families Together Act, which has created a very high bar to be able to remove children from homes of parents who may be drug addicted or otherwise neglectful, abusive. Um, Many times, so it is, of course, related to the drug epidemic that we have. So, this was a law passed in 2021, the Keeping Families Together Act, which increased that bar for taking kids from homes to the point now that even if the caseworker said they pay a visit to a home, maybe it's a family member who says, you better check on this kid. I know, the parents are in active drug abuse, there's neglect, I've seen things, it's bad, check it out. They go and pay a visit. They can even see drugs on the coffee table and maybe evidence that that child is otherwise being abused or neglected. And that alone is not a high enough bar to remove children from the home any longer in the state of Washington. And it has led to an alarming increase in critical incidents where children are killed, where children are left to die. And it's something that lawmakers have been trying to sound the alarm on for the last several sessions that I've been down in Olympia. Now, I want to show you this video. We're not turning up the sound on this because there's a lot of foul language in it, but this was put up in the last couple of days on Instagram by someone who was in Seattle and witnessed a guy with a tiny baby strapped to his chest. I'm not going to put this man's name out there, but according to a state lawmaker and a caseworker here, this 41-year-old man, was arrested back in April on theft, identity theft, trafficking and stolen property, and some other charges. And then there was a dependency hearing scheduled as well because of this child. I don't know if he's a single dad. I have no idea what the situation is. But I'm told that his case went before Thurston County Superior Court Judge um, Sharonda Amamillo, who is a current Supreme Court candidate. Though her decisions would not have directly affected the dependency case, that would have been a different court. The criminal case would have gone before her. Now, I reached out today to ask her specifically about the case, if she'd seen the video. She did not want to respond directly to that, but I want to put up the response I received from her via email. And she said, the case is held in open public court. There is nothing secret that happens in open court. People should watch court to learn more about the case. You may well know that a judicial officer is unable to engage in ex parte communication about an ongoing case. However, I have absolutely zero issues with the public logging in on Zoom and watching how the law is applied to each unique set of facts. I followed up again to say, well, will you at least confirm that, in fact, this guy is your client, or not your client, but, appeared in your court, that this was a case that you handled? She did not respond to that. So I'm unable to independently confirm if the man in the video, in fact, is the same as this man who would have gone before her, seen in that video with the baby strapped to him. It's disturbing. Obviously, it appears he's either buying or using drugs. And, you've got a tiny baby that is very vulnerable. And so that is a huge concern. And this brings us back to this standard under the Keeping Families Together Act that is an imminent risk of physical harm. So you're going to hear now from this DCYF supervisor, but again, by the name of Jeanette Obels, who told me that they tried desperately back in 2021 to tell lawmakers this is a bad idea. I get that you're trying to make sure kids aren't taken from parents unfairly and that parents have the opportunity to, fix their own behavior, take parenting classes, maybe go to rehab. But there are too many cases, she says, where the children's needs, the children's rights are not being heard because of this high bar for removal. And she told me what she really thinks lawmakers are missing is the consideration of the really bad cases that she says caseworkers at DCYF are seeing all too often.
I think one of the things that really needs to be considered is the range, for lack of a better term, of the abuse and neglect that we see. I think that a lot of these laws are written with really good intentions, but not really with the idea that there are going to be some parents with really serious allegations against them. We see cases of sexual abuse. We see cases of torture. And another thing that the Washington State Supreme Court and the legislature has agreed on is that in any case, we're supposed to provide services to prevent removal. I don't know, and nobody has been able to tell me what service I put in place to return a child to a person who sexually abused them, or to a parent who knew that their child was being sexually abused and didn't protect them. I don't know what service I put in place for a parent who was intentionally withholding food from their child. Like, those are things that 60 to 90 days of services are never going to be able to fix. And I don't think when these laws or these Supreme Court decisions are made that they are really thinking of those circumstances, because who wants to think about it? Except for like crazy people who go into this work, apparently.
Now, she shared with me another concern based on a state law that was passed either that same year in 2021 or very near there, which I was not aware of. This law requires that kids that are removed from the home have to have a visit with a parent within the first couple of days. That may make sense in many cases, as Jeanette shared with me. It's traumatizing for a child removed from a home, even if they are being abused and neglected by that parent. But of course, they still love them, right? So that may make sense. But she said there are many situations where it's extremely traumatizing for that child being required to see the parent again, who they might have just shared some information with somebody else about. They might be very worried about seeing that parent again.
For most kids, it's really important for them to see their parents pretty quickly after removal, because even if a kid is harmed by their parent, they still love them. That parent, in the vast majority of cases, still love their kid. It a lot of times can help, spark that fire to get into services and stuff too. So being able to do that more often, fantastic. Love it. It has made things easier for us. But what it said, again, because we're not thinking about those most extreme cases, was that every parent must be offered a visit within 72 hours of removal. So that means I could have a child have a forensic interview where they disclose horrific abuse. And what the law says is that I have to have that child visit their parent, who they just made disclosures about, unless there's an emergency no contact order. However, we already established our courts don't have emergency hearings, so we can't get an emergency no contact order. And again, I think it's, as hard as we lobbied that session, as much as we, as union members, tried to explain this is not how our courts work, this is not how our system works, we weren't listened to. And I don't think the vast majority of people in Washington want their, we're public servants. I don't think they want their public servants asking a 6-year-old to go visit their parent who sexually abused them.
So in Jeanette's high position with WFSE, She will certainly be back in Olympia this next session, she told me. Other lawmakers, including Representative Travis Couture and Representative Josh Penner, two of the Republicans I know who have tried in recent sessions to amend the Keeping Families Together Act and amend that imminent physical harm standard to make it easier when caseworkers identify kids who need to be protected, need to be removed from homes, that there isn't such a high bar and they don't take a case to court and a judge says, can't really help you here. There's not imminent physical harm to this kid just because there were drugs on the coffee table when you walked in or just because there was rotting food in the fridge. It's not enough in Washington now. So I know there's going to be continued efforts and a lot of pressure in this next legislative session to fix this, and we'll be there to cover it. So thank you for watching today's episode of Washington in Focus Daily. We hope to see you again on Friday morning. Until then, have a great rest of your day.